So you don't have to keep building everything out on the edge. Economic development is also about choices. So should we be putting all our money into a few big businesses, or should we be putting more money into small businesses, or should we be diversifying our economy? Should we be depending on one or two things? You know, it used to be, in the old economy, it was all about business recruitment. You know, when I was growing up in Alabama, so every little town, buy a piece of land on the edge of town, you put in sewer and water, and you put up a sign that says industrial park, and then you try like crazy to get some plant, factory, or distribution center to move there. Well, we're only building a couple hundred new plants, factories, and distribution centers anymore in America to do anything, and a lot of those communities weren't winning in that competition. So the old model of economic development was all about, shotgun recruitment. It was about cheap labor. And quality of life really didn't matter. And it was about sort of, what you didn't have, let's go try and get that. Well, you know what the most important site selection criteria is in America today is, access to talent. And you know what talent is interested in more than anything else? The quality of the community. The quality of the community. I'll never forget when I graduated from college, you have these recruiters who come and they interview from various companies. And people would, try to get a job with the company, then move to that community. Today, young people figure out where they want to live, and then they move to that community. And that's kind of the opportunity you have here in Hattiesburg as well, is to create a community that young people want to move to. Mississippi is one of those states that has been losing population. And that's because young people, thought that they could get a better opportunity someplace else. But even if they leave, if you create a great community, they're going to want to come back here to raise their family when they get older. So place really matters. And today, investment in place is becoming far more important than the utility of the location. I mean, every place has got an interstate interchange anymore, or railroad junctions, etc. But it's those places that are special in and of themselves that most people want to visit. Here's a survey that was done by a group out in Rocky Mountain West, and they found that young people in particular, were willing to sacrifice salary, for the ideal community. And today, people on the move are looking for great communities. I mentioned millions of people leaving the big cities, and they're looking for great communities. Another thing I want to say is if you can't differentiate yourself in a world where capital is footloose, you simply have no competitive advantage. That's why I was really excited to hear about all these murals, for example. Although really a lot of exciting things going on here. Sameness, ladies and gentlemen, is a minus in the world we live in today. It is not a plus. Let's just think about that from the standpoint of tourism. The more Hattiesburg, Mississippi comes to look just like every place else, the less reason there would be to come here. On the other hand, the more you would do to enhance the uniqueness of this place, whether that's artistic or architectural or cultural or natural, whatever, the more people would want to come, because that's exactly what tourism is. It's about visiting places that are different, unusual, and unique. If every place was just like every place else, there'd simply be no reason to visit any place. And so, really, the unique assets of this community are what can set you apart. And those are the assets you can build on. You've got a small river here. Did you know that Columbus, Georgia now has the best urban whitewater rafting in the United States? Because they have the Chattahoochee River, but they created a whitewater rafting course right in their downtown where people can go kayaking and surfing and rafting, etc., etc. Community character matters, as Mark Twain used to say. We take stock of a city like we take stock of a man. The clothes or the appearance are the externals by which we judge. Let's talk about a community's front door, its gateway. And just like with meeting a person, a good first impression is important, and a bad first impression is hard to change. Let me ask you this question. Would you rather, if you had a choice, visit the town, of Franklin, Tennessee, or Midfield, Alabama? Which one looks more like a community, the sense of pride and a sense of place? Which one looks more like a community that you would rather invest time or money in? If you don't remember anything else I say this afternoon, remember this. the image of a community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that every single day in America, people make decisions about where to live, where to invest, where to vacation, where to retire, based on what our communities look like, what they look like. So this is the official travel guide for the state of Oregon. Check out their slogan, Oregon, things look different here. Can you imagine a state travel brochure that said something like, Mississippi, things look the same here? Well, of course not, because who'd want to come? So once again, think about the role that building on the distinctiveness of Mississippi has to its economic well-being. And it goes well beyond tourism, because in today's economy, place is more important than almost anything else. You know, even the National Association of Home Builders, that's NAHB, they like to say that the place has become more important than the product. What does the home builders mean when they say that? Well, what they mean, of course, is that what's going on outside of a house will have far more impact on the value of the house than what's going on inside of the house. The character of the neighborhood will affect the value of your home much more than whether you have granite countertops, for example, or a home entertainment center. Why do you think for many years you could buy a beautiful Victorian house in parts of Detroit for $18,000? Had nothing to do with the house and everything to do with the neighborhood. So, you know, one of my favorite turnaround cities is Oklahoma City, and Mick Cornett, who was the 4-term mayor there, used to like to say that economic development is really the result of creating places that people want to be. And in the real estate industry, we have a thing we talk about, it's called the place-making dividend. What's that mean? Well, it simply means this. People stay longer, they come back more often, and they spend more money in places that attract their affection. Do you know that the average amount of time that Americans have been spending in an enclosed shopping mall or a strip center has been going down for years? First of all, because all the stores are exactly the same. People just go to buy what they want and they leave. But people will go into a place like a downtown, and they will stay longer, they will spend more, and they'll come back more often because it's a place they love to be. So the more you love a place, the more you'll take care of the place. And by the way, when people talk about sustainable development, what does that really mean? If you look up the definition of the dictionary of sustainable, it simply says sustainable means enduring. Enduring. A sustainable community, ladies and gentlemen, is a place of enduring value. So what does investment in place look like? So I'll show you a couple of examples. So this is a small town my daughter lives in. This is Frederick, Maryland. And this was a town that had, seen disinvestment for many, many years. And it had a terrible flooding problem as well. They had a small river called Carroll Creek that right through the middle of their downtown. And they had this terrible flood back in the late 1990s. And then Mayor decided to brings in the Corps of Engineers, and they have this idea for how they're going to fix this with big levees and, flood walls and all this stuff. He says, no, why don't we spend a little more money, and why don't we put the flood waters in a huge culvert that's underground, and then let's create a small town version of the San Antonio River Walk on top. And you wouldn't believe the pushback that he got. Oh, that's ridiculous. Oh, that costs too much. Oh, that won't work, etc., etc. And yes, it did cost more than the simple floodplain approach would have cost. But literally within 5 years, it had almost $300 million in new investment along Carroll Creek. Today, this is the fastest growing town in the state of Maryland. Today, there are 5,000 people living in downtown Frederick, and they have 800 retailers and restaurants. And it's a place that will never be the same because someone had a vision for how to make that community better. And so let me show you another example. So I was out in this little town in Idaho last year, Caldwell, Idaho, and they were another community that was really suffering. The mayor said, we know we had to do something, and so they had this parking lot behind the main street in their downtown, and they decided to spend $7.5 million to put in a new park back there. And in the summer, it's got water features like splash pads and things like that, and then it has a winter ice skating rink, etc. And literally, within 2 years, they had 200,000 people coming downtown. and they have reduced the downtown vacancies by 50%, and they've had a dozen new businesses open within the first year, a dozen new businesses within the first year. I'll tell you a little story. I was in a little place called Sulphur Springs, Texas. I was out in Texas. I was photographing courthouse squares, and you probably know this. Texas has more counties than any other state, 261 counties. They're all little counties, and they have beautiful courthouses in Texas. And most of them have these squares around them. And there was this town called Sulphur Springs, which I went to photograph, had this beautiful courthouse. And it only had one thing on the courthouse wall, and that was a flagpole. And they only had one event downtown, that was called 4th of July. And then somebody gets the bright idea of, let's put a splash pad on the courthouse lawn. And then somebody said, well, let's have our birthday party downtown at the splash pad, and all these little kids start coming downtown. And then somebody says, let's have a movie night, and let's have a concert, and let's have a health fair, and let's have a dance class, and let's have a health fair. And then they had 250 events a year. And a year ago, they were voted the best and most improved small town in Texas. But it all began with a small investment in themselves and creating a place that people love to be. And, you know, you've got a lot of assets here already. You've got a great university here. You have a downtown that's on its way up. Historic buildings, walkable neighborhoods, parks, green space, arts and culture, local shops and restaurants. Why do I talk about local shops? It's because if you spend $1 in a locally owned business, it will recirculate through your community 3 times more than $1 spent in a chain store. So every $1 you spend in Walmart, you're going to end up, most of it is going to be in Bentonville, Arkansas. Every $1 you spend here will recirculate through this because people here have a local accountant and they have a local ad agency and have, so the money just keeps going around and around. So what about downtowns? Why are downtowns so important? Well, obviously for the reasons I have on this screen, et cetera, et cetera. But, think about this. So this is a business that used to, a magazine that used to be for industrial park developers. And notice the headline says, when sites searching the South, make sure you inspect the communities downtown first. Now, why in the world would an industrial park developer care about a downtown, even though they're not going to put their plant or factory or distribution, whatever it is, in a downtown? Well, the answer to that is pretty obvious. What we've come to realize is if you don't have a healthy downtown, you simply don't have a healthy town. There's an expression that the apple rots from the inside out, and another thing we've learned over our 40 years in this business is that it's hard to be a suburb of nothing. And so having the healthy downtown is important to the health of your entire community. And I don't care what business you're in, when people come to your town to think about living here, or working here, investing here, the first thing they're going to look at is your downtown. And companies are moving back downtown again. Did you know that McDonald's moved their corporate headquarters from Oak Brook, Illinois back into downtown Chicago? They used to have 2,000 parking spaces out in Oak Brook. Now they have 200 because they're on a rail line in downtown, 2 rail lines. In fact, there are hundreds of companies moving into downtowns, and I've just listed a few of them there: Motorola, McDonald's, Marriott, Caterpillar, Walgreens, Quicken Loans, GE, Red Hat. I could just go on and on and on. And why did they move? Well, number one reason was to attract and retain talented workers. It's kind of ironic to me, living in the Washington area, that we got, and we didn't need it, the second world headquarters for Amazon. They should have gone to Baltimore or Philadelphia, a place that really needed the jobs. Washington is recession-proof. I mean, when the Republicans are in, they hire all private contractors to do everything the Democrats were hired to do in the government. So no matter what happens in Washington, they're doing fine. So we didn't really need Amazon. But you know why they came to Arlington County, Virginia, right across the river? Because Arlington County is the most well-educated county in America. 35% of everybody in Arlington County has a graduate degree. So access to talent. And this is the kind of thing that's going on around the country. So this is Amazon used to be, this is the first headquarters is in Seattle, but it used to be all over the suburbs. And they decided to move into downtown, into the 11 buildings that you see here. And it used to be there was only one way to get to work at Amazon. It was called drive your car. And of course now you can still drive your car, but you could also take the train, or take a bus, or take the ferry, or ride your bike, or walk because thousands of people live within a 10 or 15-minute walk of the new Amazon headquarters. And then talk about building on the assets you have. So Durham, what was Durham? It used to be a tobacco town and a textile town. And so what did they have? They had abandoned textile factories and, empty tobacco warehouses, and they had all these vacant parking lots, and they said, well, hey, maybe we could do something with those. And so this is what it looks like today. And, Wheeling, West Virginia, I know Wheeling, anybody here ever been to Wheeling? It has one of the greatest collections of Victorian architecture in the United States. They have a Roebling Bridge. Roebling's the guy who built the Brooklyn Bridge. They have another bridge like that in Wheeling. And for years, they were just going down here. They're a former industrial town. Rust Belt, so they kept losing population, going down, down, down. And the state decides, well, first we'll put a casino there. Well, of course, casinos don't even have windows, so they don't want you to know what time it is. So nobody goes to the casino is going into the downtown. And then they decide to give $35 million to Cabela's to build a store 10 miles outside of town on Interstate 70. And of course, then they built the interchange for Interstate 70. And in the 5 years after they built the Cabela's, they continued to lose population. In fact, they lost 15% more population. And it wasn't until they started investing in their downtown and in their historic buildings that they started to turn themselves around. Now, 2019, we named them one of the Great American Main Street Award winners. It was all because of stuff like this. So, did you know that 29% of American households have are single people, headed by a single person living alone? 29%. 75% of American households have no school-age children. So, a lot of young people would love to live in a downtown. So they're taking these old warehouses and putting apartments in them. Then they took the abandoned apartment store and they put apartments in there. And then all of a sudden, things like this started to happen. So this is the largest law firm in California, Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe. They moved their entire back office operations to Wheeling, West Virginia in an old factory. I'm going to show you some more examples of that in just a minute. So what is the value of historic buildings and neighborhoods and landscapes? Well, clearly it's about what we call value, but historic building stock is often community's greatest asset. That's true in so many Mississippi communities. But it's important to the psychology of a place as well as the economy of a place. Let me show you what I mean by that. Some of you probably, when you grew up and were in college or high school, you read some of Tom Wolfe's novels, like Look Homeward Angel. He's the guy that penned the immortal line, "You can't go home again." Well, sadly, Tom Wolfe, he can't go home again to at least his original house in Asheville, North Carolina, because there it is. It's in this parking lot right there. Why save historic buildings? Because these are the places that physically connect us to the past. These are the places who tell us who we are and where we came from. Ladies and gentlemen, a city without a past is like a man without a memory. So saving the historic buildings of your community is incredibly important to the psychology of your community, but it's also important to the economics of your community. This is the kind of stuff we track at the National Main Street Center. Things like jobs and property values and tourism. You just saw those statistics from Hattiesburg here a minute ago, but let's just look at a couple of examples. So this is one of the very first Main Street towns in America. This was called Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin, and it was a town going downhill. And this used to be their fire station. And then a guy bought it and turned it into a pizza parlor. And then they brought in the Main Street program, and one of the things they talked about was design, the importance of good design. And they said, well, why don't we restore the facade of that building? And they did that. But it also tells a story about the history of the building. But perhaps more importantly, did you know that the sale of pizza almost doubled in that restaurant, and it sustained that over a multi-year period? Let me show you another example. This is sort of a typical downtown building. This happens to be in a place called Bay City, Michigan, and there's a bank on the first floor, and what's upstairs? Nothing but storage space. Okay, so a guy buys that building, and he puts in 26 apartments on upper floors, a restaurant, office space down below. And why was that so good for the community? Well, because it improved the image of the downtown, brought more foot traffic, more tax revenue, more residents, more liveliness, more activity after 5 o'clock. There's an old saying that retail follows rooftops. You want to get more stores in downtown, put more housing in downtown. And you know, when I was at Destination Downtown last year, one of the things that I always like to do before I come to a community is I look up the biggest economic development subsidy that a state has ever given to any business. And in Mississippi, it was the Nissan plant outside of Jackson, and they gave them $1.3 billion. And that was a pretty successful investment because they ended up with a 5,000 person plant. But that 5,000 people cost the state of Mississippi $1.3 billion. That's about $200,000 per job. But during the same exact 5-year period, the Mississippi Main Street program developed 7,400 new jobs and 1,000 new businesses and restored 462 buildings. And, you know, brought in hundreds of units of new downtown housing. And guess how much they got from the state of Mississippi? $100,000 a year. So I'm not saying, you know, don't invest in Nissan, but what I'm also saying is that if given a chance to exist, these small downtown buildings can punch above their weight class. And they, you know, small deals and small developments and small business can result in big impact. And that seems to me what you're doing here. And just keep that ball rolling, because that's a way to create a dynamic community without huge infusions of public money. Also, tourism. Let's think about some of the biggest tourist attractions in America. So I was one of the consultants brought into New Orleans after Katrina, and they said they wanted a redevelopment plan. They didn't want just a physical redevelopment plan, they wanted an economic redevelopment plan. So of course all the consultants, we said to all the people from the state Office of Economic Development, said, well, what's the biggest industry in Louisiana? Is it oil, sugar, chemicals? What is it? They said, no, it's tourism. Tourism is the biggest industry in Louisiana. What's the engine of that industry? Well, it's the French Quarter and all the other historic neighborhoods in New Orleans. But of course, it was so ironic because most of you probably know that for about 40 years, the state of Louisiana wanted to put a freeway through the French Quarter. And they didn't really understand that that was more important and more valuable than any plant, factory, or distribution center in the entire state of Louisiana. They do now. And so we need to start thinking about economic development in a little different way. Or how about, let's go to San Antonio. You know, the San Antonio River, years ago, they wanted to put it underground into a culvert. Today, it's the single most visited place in all of Texas. Or how about, let's go out to Seattle and visit the Pike Place Farmers Market. 4.5 million visitors a year, okay? But literally 30 years ago, the city council wanted to tear it down. Why? They said, we need more downtown parking. Like parking for what? Of all the parking in the world, if there's nothing to do, no one's going to want to go there. If you have a parking problem, that means you're successful. So, you know, I think Arthur Frommer summed it up pretty well when he said, among cities and towns with no particular recreational appeal, those that preserve their past continue to enjoy tourism. Tourists simply won't visit a city or town that has lost its soul. So saving the soul or restoring the soul of the community is pretty important to its economic well-being. But I want to tell you what's happening and how the real estate world is changing. So we do a report at the Urban Land Institute every year called Emerging Trends in Real Estate. We've been doing this for about 30 years. And we look at what are the best things in real estate to invest in, where are the best places to invest in. If you'd looked at our report, 20 years ago, would have said things like self-storage facilities or strip centers with a grocery store anchor, okay? Well, that's completely changed now. So our 2016 report had a very interesting finding. And this comes out of interviews with thousands of developers all over the country, bankers, investment people, et cetera, et cetera. We found that, quote, office space in rehabilitated industrial buildings like old mills, warehouses, et cetera, was commanding higher rents than new Class A office space. So let me show you an example. That's a new Class A office building in Anywhere, USA, okay? Let me show you another new office building. That's in Minneapolis. That's actually an old brewery called the Gold Belt Brewery. But what's significant about it is getting higher rents, faster lease up, and lower turnover than buildings that look like that. Okay? And why is that? Because employers and employees today both love space with character. And also in these old buildings, they have huge floor plates, which makes it easy to move things around. And so flexibility is really important in the work world today. So let me just show you what's been going on in corporate America. So this former derelict wharf in Boston, that's now the world headquarters for the Converse shoe company. Or did you know that Starbucks world headquarters is in the former Sears Warehouse Distribution Center in Seattle, or that the Walgreens world headquarters is in the former vacant post office in downtown Chicago, or that the Under Armour headquarters is in the former Navy Yard in Philadelphia, or the Under Armour headquarters in the former Tide detergent plant on the harbor in Baltimore. And this is true of housing, it's true of retail, it's true of hospitality. Here's the State Mental Hospital in New York, which is now a fancy hotel called the Henry Hotel. So we've replaced the patient rooms with guest rooms. If you go over to San Antonio, they've turned the old jail into a Holiday Inn Express. If you go out to Iowa, you'll see the former John Deere factory is now a Marriott courtyard. Did you know that 25% of the new Marriotts in America are now going into historic buildings? Because they found that young people in particular, millennials, love buildings in downtowns. Well, I went to the State Historic Preservation Conference in Indiana a few years ago, and it was in Richmond, Indiana. Put me up on the Hampton Inn, but they didn't have a downtown. It was out on the highway. The only thing they walked to was the Jiffy Lube. And I'm like, well, don't you have anything to stay in downtown? No, we don't have anything like that. But the hotel industry has figured this out. And historic buildings are a huge underutilized asset. And so when you start thinking about development, think about reuse first, and then think about building new second. So I want to end this part of tell you a little bit about arts and culture. I'm so excited about all the murals here. I'm going to start using you guys in my talks. And but arts and culture goes to things like museums and theaters and concert halls and art galleries and public squares and taverns and coffee houses, etc. One of the things I like is that typically when I travel around, somebody will pick me up, drive me around town. They'll tell me the story of their town. This happened here. Somebody grew up here. This is what this used to be, etc. But I want to suggest to you that the story of Hattiesburg, Mississippi is an economic asset. And that what you want to do is to make the story of this place manifest in the landscape. So tell the story. So, if you go to Sevierville, Tennessee, that's where Dolly Parton's from. So they have a statue of Dolly in the courthouse square. If you go to Annapolis, that's where Thurgood Marshall is from. So we have a statue of Thurgood Marshall there. But public art can really be an asset to community, economically, psychologically, all the ways I've already talked about. And it can also attract visitors and publicity and attention. So you might want to think about celebrating famous people, like Babe Ruth, he grew up in Baltimore, or William Faulkner's Oxford, Mississippi, or Buddy Holly, he's from Lubbock. And you say, okay, we put the Eudora Welty statue up in Jackson, or James Brown mural in Cincinnati, where he's from. But you might also want to celebrate famous events, like that's the Franklin Roosevelt Memorial in D.C., where they have the bread line from the Great Depression, or in Greensboro, North Carolina, where they talk about the lunch counter sit-ins in downtown Greensboro. But you say, well, we don't have any famous people. Well, you have ordinary people, people who made this place what it is. You might celebrate, the people who made this community what it is. But also, murals can tell a story. That's the Chisholm Trail mural in Texas, which tells the story of the cattle drives and the role of creating Fort Worth. And that's the family album, the little town I live in, Tacoma Park, Maryland. All those pictures support the history of our town. Wiley's was an ice cream parlor, was the inspiration for the TV show Happy Days, for example. The one in the lower left is called the Yankee Diner mural in Nashua, New Hampshire. And that was a real diner that existed in Nashua for many years, and it burned down in a fire. So they wanted to bring it back to life. How did they pay for the mural? Well, you see all the people in that mural? They're all real people who live in Nashua today. They all paid to have their pictures included in the mural. So where there's a will, there's a way. And money always follows good ideas. Or in Dothan, where they talk about the civil rights heritage of the community. Or how about in Louisville, where they have the biggest baseball bat in the world? It's appropriate, because that's where they make the bats that they use in the major league. Or how about, if you want to see what old Orlando looks like, just go check out the 23-foot high postcard. You can get those in the stores. Well, they built one 23-foot high in downtown Orlando. But sometimes public art doesn't always have to tell a story. Sometimes you just can add fun and excitement and whimsy to a place. By the way, the tree is real, the girl is not. How about this one in Columbia, South Carolina? That's a trompe l'oeil, fool the eye mural. They finally had to put a sign up there because people were trying to drive into this thing. In my little town, we did an inventory of boarded up windows. And let me show you the kind of thing we did with boarded up windows. We started doing stuff like that. And people would literally, this was a safety hazard actually, because people were scrambling the brakes on their car because they were so excited to see these things. And they were calling 911 to let them know there was a fire in downtown. Or how about this one? This is a sculpture in Siena. Remember the famous picture from World War II of the sailor kissing the nurse in Times Square? But anyway, they have a statue of that out in San Diego now. And I'm proud to see, I'm going to start using your public art trail when I talk about this now instead of ones from other places. I'm so excited about all the murals you're doing here. All right, so I want to end on this note. So I've been doing this for many, many years. I've worked in literally hundreds and hundreds of communities. And I've come to some conclusions about why some communities succeed and some communities fail. First and foremost, successful communities always have a vision for the future. Having grown up in Alabama, I can tell you, and I'm sure you hear this in Mississippi too, there are people who will tell you, I'm against planning. I say, okay, well then you tell me the name of any successful organization, institution, corporation, or community that doesn't plan for the future. Failing to plan simply means planning to fail. As the book of Proverbs says, without vision, the people will perish. Try to imagine a corporation that didn't have a business plan. Well, they'd have a really hard time getting any investors. Same thing is true with a community. Successful plans always begin by inventorying your assets. And then successful communities build all their plans around the enhancement of the assets they already have. Successful communities, ladies and gentlemen, use education, incentives, partnerships, and voluntary initiatives, not just regulation. Now, I didn't say I'm against regulation. It prevents bad things from happening. Sets a minimum standard of conduct. But, let's use carrots, not just sticks. Let's make it easier to do the right things and harder to do the wrong things. Successful communities pick and choose. Successful communities have strong leaders and committed citizens. So when I was growing up in Birmingham, this was the one city we used to make fun of, Chattanooga. Chattanooga, not Birmingham, was voted the most polluted city in America in 1970. But no one makes fun of Chattanooga anymore, because today Chattanooga is known as an international model for community revitalization. And it began with two big things. Tennessee River, that was the most important natural asset in downtown, because that was the heart and soul of their community. How about a small town advancement? Welcome to Susan City, California. In 1990, it was voted the worst place to live in Northern California. And that was their city hall. It was in 2 double-wide trailers. This was the only city hall in California you had to register the Department of Motor Vehicles. But public buildings were kind of important. And for, most of American history, public buildings were always our most beautiful and important buildings. And they were almost always downtown. And then starting about 1970, we decided that cheaper was better. And you know what we learned from that experience? We learned that cheaper was simply cheaper. And you know what they said in Susan City, California? They said, why would anyone invest in a community that wouldn't invest in itself? So they said, we need to set the standard. So they built a new city hall right on that same spot. And did you know that a decade later, they were voted one of the best places to live in Northern California? But it all began with a new city hall to set the standard of what they wanted to see in the future. Let me show you a southern example. Welcome to Port Royal, South Carolina, the gateway to the Paris Island Marine Corps base. The funky little town going no place. That used to be their city hall. And then somebody said, well, maybe we could change the image of our community. That's their new city hall. By the way, they only use the first floor. The second floor is rented out to lawyers' offices and a real estate office, et cetera, et cetera. But that began their transformation. Successful communities inventory their assets, natural, cultural, human, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes it's pretty obvious. Welcome to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. World-class scenery, unparalleled wildlife resources. How about Annapolis, Maryland? Incredible architectural and historic resources. Sometimes the assets are not very obvious. Welcome to Lowell, Massachusetts. 1975, it was a dying industrial city. Had an unemployment rate of 28%. Thought it had no assets, but what it had was abandoned textile mills. So they said, well, maybe we can reuse those mills. And today, this is the Charleston, South Carolina of New England. Today, this city gets millions of tourists. They've reused all the textile mills. Now they're housing, they're retail, they're the University of Massachusetts at Lowell in old warehouse buildings, and on and on. How about Columbus, Georgia? Had a terrible flood along the Chattahoochee River. And they said, when we build back, let's build back better. So they built one of the great river walks in the United States. And now, right out here is where the whitewater rafting is taking place. Or how about in Alexandria, Virginia, where they had an old torpedo factory right on the waterfront that actually built torpedoes in World War II. Today it's the largest art center in the United States, 100 working artists getting millions of tourists coming in there every year. Or how about Paducah, Kentucky, that turned their flood walls into art galleries? Or how about Lancaster, California, that turned their Main Street into a boulevard? Or how about Akron, Ohio, when the Quaker Oats Company was leaving, they said, let's don't tear down the grain elevators, let's make them the centerpiece of the Quaker Oats redevelopment plan. That's the Hilton Hotel today. Or how about Rapid City? We used to argue about having enough parking, but nobody was going downtown until they built a park like this. And that's a ice rink in the winter, by the way. Or how about Poughkeepsie, New York? They had this abandoned rail bridge over the Hudson River, 275 feet in the air. New York DOT has set aside millions of dollars for its demolition. But some people in the community said, no, give us the same amount of money, let's turn it into a state park. Now they're getting hundreds of thousands of visitors a year just coming to walk across the Hudson, 275 feet up in the air. Successful communities use education, incentives, partnerships, and voluntary initiatives. Why do we educate? In order to reduce the need to regulate. Why do we educate? Because people won't embrace what they don't understand. Incentives. Yeah, there's lots of different incentives you could use, and besides free coats, which is one way you might approach things, but how about expedited permit reviews, or reduced fees, or property tax credits, or form-based codes, or on-site mitigation, or code flexibility? Grand Forks, North Dakota, reduce liquor license costs if you build a restaurant in downtown. Or how about in Stanton, Virginia, routinely now in one of the top 10 small towns in America, somebody proposed a historic district 25 or 30 years ago, and it was like, over my dead body. You're not going to tell me what to do with my building. So they didn't get a historic district. Somebody said, well, Historic Stanton Foundation has an architect, and they'll provide free design assistance. They'll do your design. They weren't going to pay for the renovation. If you restore your building, then one person did it. Then their neighbor said, well, how'd you do that? Then 2 people did it, then 3 people did it, then 5 people did it. Now everybody's done it, and now they have 5 historic districts. Voluntary initiatives. You can start planting trees along every boulevard in the city tomorrow. You get the National Guard to plan for you, the Boy Scouts, etc. Did you know that during 1863 in the Battle of Gettysburg, there were no utility wires running through the battlefield? Did you guys know that? Well, guess what? They're all gone now because of a voluntary partnership between the state of Pennsylvania, Adams County, the city of Gettysburg, the Ted Turner Foundation, the National Park Service. They undergrounded 5 miles of wire through the Gettysburg battlefield. How about Yazoo City, the poorest part of Mississippi, right? And this was what the downtown used to look like till they started passing out free paint to people in downtown, and they have painted their way back to vitality once again. Or, but successful communities pick and choose. There's the old expression, if you don't stand for something, you'll settle for anything. So my point here is that set standards, raise your expectations about what you can get and what you can achieve. And one of the things I spend a lot of my time working with is with national chain stores and franchises like CVS or Walgreens or McDonald's, whatever. That's a typical off-the-shelf CVS. And CVS always wants the maximum corner, and they want to suburbanize it, okay? They wanted to do that in Davidson, North Carolina. Davidson said no. But you know what? CVS has already concluded this is where they're going to do whatever they have to do to be in an economically profitable location. You need to know that every chain store and franchise in America has Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. And what gets built depends on you. And how much pushback you and public officials give them on the importance of design. I mean, think about this. If the federal government came down here to Hattiesburg and told you what your community is going to look like, it'd be like, get the guns, we're going to fight. But you let a multinational corporation come in and tell you what your community is going to look like? You don't have to accept that. The character of Hattiesburg is more important than some corporate preference for what they want. So let me just show you what I mean by that. So that's a typical off-the-shelf Walgreens. Plan A. Try a little better, you get Plan B. Try a little better, harder, you get Plan C. And by the way, every Plan C is different because every place is different. That's Key West, Florida, by the way. And all of the rules in retail have changed. So it used to be, you'd never see a grocery store like a Harris Teeter in a mixed-use building, or a downtown Whole Foods, or a Target or a Walmart in a multi-story building, or a grocery store or a store-to-store, but it's happening all over the country. Do you know we have 200 multi-story Targets in America now? 200. Do you know Target's buying up department stores in cities all over America to put the Target in the downtown again? And ladies and gentlemen, it is never too late. I forget, was it Sean's comment about trees? George H.W. Bush, he was a big tree guy. He loved planting trees. And he used to say, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is tomorrow. And that's the way you need to think about community development. It's never too late to make a community better. Communities deteriorate one project and one billboard and one building at a time, and that's how they get better, one project at a time. And I understand that, leadership, this is what comes up. I love this quote from Monty Python. He says, apart from sanitation, medicine, education, wine, public order, roads, irrigation, public health, and a freshwater system, what have the Romans ever done for us? And that's what people think about our elected leadership, right? But, it doesn't take a lot of people to change a community for the better. I would just point over to Laurel, where a young couple has, helped to transform that small community. But and I understand it's not always easy getting things done in small communities. Welcome to Buena Vista, Virginia, home with 6,002 happy citizens and 3 old grouches. Doesn't that kind of sum up community in Anytown? I don't care what you guys decide you want to do here. There will be people who will tell you, can't do it, won't work, costs too much, tried it already. And I understand that no is a powerful word in a small town, small city in the South. But I want to tell you a more powerful word, yes. Yes, we can make Hattiesburg a better place to live in, to look at, to work in, to visit. Ladies and gentlemen, a pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity, but an optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. Ladies and gentlemen, a vision counts, but implementation is priceless. Thank you so much for having me.